To truly know the light, one must first confront the darkness within. Embracing this darkness, the shadow, is not about succumbing to it, but understanding its hidden power and integrating it into the conscious self, a path toward wholeness that is too often avoided. It was Carl Jung who offered profound insights into this inner realm, illuminating the nature of the shadow and its transformative potential for those brave enough to face it. What if the aspects of ourselves that we deem most unacceptable, most repulsive, held the very keys to our liberation and our greatest personal power? For millennia, humanity has sensed the presence of shadow figures lurking within the depths of the psyche. Ancient cultures and mythologies are replete with demons, tricksters, and dark gods, archetypal figures embodying the unacknowledged and often feared aspects of the human experience. Jung's work can be seen as a modern, psychological exploration of these ancient ideas, delving into the vast realm of the unconscious and its profound influence on our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. The shadow, in this sense, is not merely a collection of negative traits, but a universal aspect of every human psyche, containing both destructive and creative potential. Yet the problem arises when we attempt to ignore or repress these shadow aspects, leading to unconscious projection, destructive behaviors, and a profound lack of self-awareness. So, how can we learn to recognize and integrate our shadow, harnessing its potential for creativity, growth, and wholeness? This exploration will delve into Jung's concept of the shadow, providing practical tools for identifying and integrating its often uncomfortable aspects, leading to a more authentic, fulfilling, and empowered life. We will begin by defining the shadow, tracing its origins in the depths of the unconscious, and exploring its multifaceted characteristics. Then, we will examine its individual and collective manifestations, revealing how it plays out in our personal relationships, in society, and even on the world stage. Finally, we will uncover practical techniques for integrating the shadow, not to eliminate it, but to harness its power for good. By understanding these principles, you will gain not just theoretical knowledge, but also practical tools for enhanced self-awareness, improved relationships, and a greater sense of personal power. So, let's begin our journey into the depths of the shadow and discover the hidden potential that lies within. But is this disowned self truly separate from who we believe ourselves to be? Or is it an intrinsic part of our very being, a dark twin lurking just beneath the surface of our carefully constructed persona? The shadow, often misunderstood as mere negativity, is far more complex, representing all that we reject, suppress, or deny within ourselves, a collection of traits and impulses deemed unacceptable by our conscious minds and the societal norms we internalize. Consider, for instance, how easily we are irritated by the arrogance of a colleague or the selfishness of a family member. Might these qualities, in fact, be reflections of our own latent tendencies, aspects of ourselves that we desperately try to keep hidden even from ourselves? The shadow is not some external entity, not a demon to be exorcised, but an inseparable part of our psychological makeup, and understanding this is the first step towards reclaiming its hidden potential. Carl Jung, the pioneering Swiss psychiatrist, delved deeply into the complexities of the shadow, distinguishing it from both the persona, the social mask we wear to navigate the world, and the conscious self, the I that we identify with. Jung argued that the shadow is formed in early childhood, a byproduct of the socialization process, as we learn to suppress certain behaviors and emotions to gain the approval of our parents and peers. We learn, often implicitly, that anger, aggression, selfishness, and even certain forms of joy are bad or unacceptable, and these aspects of our being are relegated to what Jung termed the personal unconscious, a kind of psychological storage space for repressed experiences and emotions. Is the shadow, therefore, merely a repository of negativity, a psychological garbage dump? Not at all. While the shadow certainly contains undesirable traits, it also harbors a wealth of untapped potential, including creativity, spontaneity, and authentic emotional expression. How does this shadow manifest in our daily lives? One of the most common ways is through projection, a psychological defense mechanism where we attribute our own unacceptable thoughts, feelings, or impulses to others. Imagine a scenario where two colleagues, Sarah and John, are working on a project together. Sarah, feeling insecure about her own contributions, constantly criticizes John's ideas, accusing him of being unprepared and unoriginal. Could it be that Sarah is, in fact, projecting her own feelings of inadequacy onto John, unable to acknowledge these feelings within herself? Another common manifestation is denial, the refusal to acknowledge certain aspects of ourselves or our behavior. Consider someone who consistently acts impulsively, making rash decisions without considering the consequences, yet claims to be a highly rational and logical person. This denial creates a disconnect between their self-image and their actual behavior, preventing them from addressing the underlying issues driving their impulsivity. Then there's passive aggressiveness, a subtle but insidious way of expressing negative feelings indirectly. A team member, let's call him Mark, agrees to take on a task, but then forgets to complete it, or consistently shows up late to meetings, subtly sabotaging the team's progress. The negative impact of such behavior on team morale and productivity can be significant, stemming from Mark's inability to express his dissatisfaction directly. Beyond the individual level, the shadow also operates on a collective scale, influencing social dynamics, political movements, and even historical events. The concept of the collective shadow refers to the shared, unacknowledged negative aspects of a group or society. A chilling example of this is the scapegoating of minority groups throughout history. Consider the persecution of Jewish people in Nazi Germany, where deeply rooted societal anxieties and resentments were projected onto an entire group, falsely blaming them for Germany's economic woes and social problems. This collective projection allowed ordinary individuals to disown their own destructive impulses, participating in acts of unimaginable cruelty while believing they were serving a greater good. But what are the long-term consequences of such collective shadow projection, and how can we prevent such atrocities from happening again? In essence, the shadow is a multifaceted and potent aspect of the human psyche, a repository of both our darkest impulses and our unrealized potential. Ignoring the shadow, as we have seen, leads to destructive behavior, both individually, in the form of projection, denial, and passive aggressiveness, and collectively, as demonstrated by the horrific example of Nazi Germany. Acknowledging and integrating the shadow, therefore, is not merely a matter of personal growth, but a crucial step towards creating a more just and compassionate world. But how can we begin to identify and integrate these shadowy aspects of ourselves and our world? What tools are available to us in this essential work? The answers, as we shall see, lie in exploring the specific archetypes associated with the shadow, figures like the trickster and the tyrant, who embody these hidden aspects of our being, offering profound insights into the path towards wholeness. The shadow, as we have explored, is not a monolithic entity, but rather a complex and multifaceted aspect of the human psyche, one that often manifests through various archetypes, each embodying different facets of our disowned selves. Have you ever considered that the seemingly random and chaotic events in your life might be orchestrated by a hidden hand, a mischievous force delighting in subverting your carefully laid plans? Or perhaps you have encountered individuals who seem driven by an insatiable need for control, ruthlessly suppressing dissent and imposing their will upon others. These are but glimpses of the shadow's archetypal faces, figures that reside within the collective unconscious, waiting to be recognized and understood. We can perhaps begin with two prominent examples of the shadow: the trickster, a figure of chaos, humor, and subversion, and the tyrant, representing control, domination, and oppression. These are merely two examples of many forms. Understanding these archetypes can help us recognize shadow patterns in ourselves and others, setting the stage for deeper self-awareness and perhaps setting ourselves on the path to wholeness. Let us first turn our attention to the trickster, an archetype as ancient as humanity itself. From the wily Loki in Norse mythology to the quick-witted Hermes in Greek lore and the cunning Anansi in West African folklore, the trickster appears in countless guises across cultures and throughout history. What is it about this figure that resonates so deeply within the human psyche? The trickster is, at its core, a boundary crosser, a rule breaker who delights in challenging authority and disrupting the established order. They are impulsive, deceptive, and often driven by their own self-interest, yet they also possess a sharp wit and a unique ability to see the absurdity of societal conventions. But should we dismiss the trickster as merely a disruptive force, a harbinger of chaos and disorder? Not so fast. The trickster embodies a profound duality. They can be both destructive and creative, destructive and transformative, a force for both ruin and renewal. In their chaotic dance, the trickster exposes hypocrisy, challenges rigid structures, and ultimately paves the way for new possibilities to emerge. Conversely, the tyrant represents the shadow's darker, more destructive side. Throughout history and mythology, we encounter tyrannical kings, ruthless dictators, and abusive authority figures, each embodying the tyrant's insatiable need for control and domination. What drives this relentless pursuit of power? The tyrant, at its core, is motivated by a deep-seated fear of vulnerability, a desperate attempt to shield themselves from the perceived threats of the outside world. They crave order and predictability, and they will stop at nothing to suppress dissent and maintain their iron grip on power. But unlike the trickster's playful subversion, the tyrant's actions often lead to oppression, violence, and injustice, leaving a trail of broken lives and shattered dreams in their wake. The tyrant believes that through power and control they can escape the vulnerability of the human condition, when in reality they are only isolating themselves from the very connections that give life meaning. Where do we see these shadow archetypes in the world around us? Consider the character of Captain Jack Sparrow from Pirates of the Caribbean, a modern trickster figure who embodies charm, unpredictability, and a blatant disregard for rules. Captain Jack's antics often lead to chaos and mayhem, yet he also possesses a unique ability to outsmart his adversaries and navigate seemingly impossible situations with a sly grin and a wink. But is the trickster confined to the realm of fiction? Not at all. The trickster archetype can also manifest in the form of online trolls and pranksters, individuals who use humor and deception to disrupt online communities, sometimes for harmless fun, but often with malicious intent. On the darker side, consider the rise of Hitler as a chilling example of the collective shadow, projecting the tyrant archetype onto a leader. Hitler's relentless pursuit of power, his suppression of dissent, and his unwavering belief in his own infallibility mirrored the repressed desires for order and control within the German psyche, creating a dangerous feedback loop that ultimately led to unimaginable atrocities. And what about the corporate executives who prioritize profit over ethics, exploiting workers and manipulating markets for their own personal gain? Their behavior exemplifies the tyrant's tendency to dominate and exploit, driven by a relentless pursuit of wealth and power, regardless of the human cost. The ultimate question then becomes, how do these archetypes manifest within ourselves? Have you ever acted like a trickster, using humor to deflect criticism or avoid responsibility? Perhaps you have found yourself exaggerating a story to make it more entertaining, or playing a prank on a friend for a cheap laugh. While such behavior may seem harmless on the surface, it is important to consider the underlying motivations. Are you using humor to mask deeper insecurities or avoid confronting difficult emotions? Conversely, have you ever acted like a tyrant, trying to control a situation or person through manipulation or intimidation? Perhaps you have found yourself micromanaging a project or imposing your will upon others without considering their perspectives. Such behavior may stem from a fear of vulnerability, a need to feel in control, or a belief that you know what is best for everyone involved. But are you truly acting in the best interests of others, or are you simply trying to protect yourself from perceived threats? In essence, the trickster and the tyrant represent two contrasting, yet equally potent, manifestations of the shadow, each embodying different aspects of our disowned selves. The trickster, with its playful subversion and chaotic energy, challenges us to question authority and embrace spontaneity, while the tyrant, with its relentless pursuit of control and domination, reminds us of the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of empathy and compassion. But we must remember that these are just two examples of the shadow's vast and varied landscape. The shadow can manifest in countless ways, adapting to our individual experiences and the ever-changing dynamics of our world. And what are the dangers of repressing either archetype? Repressing the trickster can lead to rigidity and a lack of creativity, while repressing the tyrant can lead to a loss of personal power and an inability to assert ourselves when necessary. Now that we've seen these archetypal faces of the shadow, how can we begin to recognize its influence in our own lives and take steps towards integration? What tools can we use? Now that we've identified some of the shadow's archetypal manifestations, from the trickster to the tyrant, the pressing question becomes, how do we begin to recognize the shadow's pervasive influence in our own lives and take concrete steps toward integration? Is it even possible to befriend something so seemingly dangerous and destructive? Shadow work is not merely a process of confronting the darkness within, but a journey of self-discovery and wholeness. It's a path toward unlocking creativity, authenticity, and a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us. Think of it like cleaning a messy and cluttered room. The initial process can feel overwhelming and unpleasant as we confront the accumulated debris of neglected emotions and disowned traits. Dusting, sorting, and discarding can bring up uncomfortable memories and stir up resistance. But ultimately, the effort leads to a more comfortable, functional, and inviting living space. Shadow work, while initially unpleasant, offers similar rewards, clearing the path for greater self-awareness, emotional resilience, and a more authentic expression of who we truly are. But how does one begin this daunting task? Undertaking shadow work requires immense courage and self-compassion. It takes strength to confront aspects of ourselves that we find unappealing, shameful, or even terrifying. It is important to remember that the shadow is not inherently evil. It is simply the repository of all that we have disowned or rejected. What if, instead of viewing the shadow as a monstrous foe, we approached it with curiosity and a willingness to understand its motivations? How might our perspective shift if we recognize that the shadow often carries valuable insights and untapped potential? Are we brave enough to look? One of the most powerful tools for engaging with the shadow and the unconscious is active imagination, a key Jungian technique. But what exactly is active imagination, and how does it differ from simply daydreaming or indulging in fantasy? Active imagination is a method of consciously interacting with the unconscious mind through imagery, dialogue, and symbolic expression. It is not a passive process, but rather an active engagement with the inner world. Jung viewed the psyche as an interactive space, that our inner figures or complexes will react to our presence, and we to theirs. This is not a one-way street, where the ego decides all. Rather, this is a negotiation. This technique allows us to give voice to shadow figures, understand their motivations, and ultimately integrate them into our conscious awareness. The key distinction between active imagination and mere daydreaming lies in the level of conscious engagement and the commitment to recording the experience. Daydreaming is often a passive and unfocused activity, where the mind wanders aimlessly without any real intention or direction. Fantasy, on the other hand, can be a form of escapism, a way to avoid confronting difficult emotions or realities. Active imagination, however, requires a deliberate and focused effort to engage with the unconscious mind, to allow images and figures to emerge spontaneously, and to record the experience through writing, drawing, or other creative means. What happens if we neglect to actively engage with the material that arises from our unconscious? Without conscious engagement, the unconscious can remain a murky and inaccessible realm, its contents continuing to influence our behavior in hidden and often destructive ways. Do you want to be at the mercy of the unconscious, or to actively engage with it? How does one begin to practice active imagination? Let's walk through a practical, step-by-step guide to help you embark on this journey of self-discovery. First, find a quiet space. Create a safe and undisturbed environment where you can relax and focus on your inner world. This could be a quiet room in your home, a peaceful spot in nature, or any place where you feel comfortable and free from distractions. It is important to choose a setting where you feel safe and secure, as confronting the shadow can be an intense and emotionally charged experience. After all, it will be just you and your mind at odds with each other. Next, consciously invite a shadow figure to appear in your imagination without judgment or expectation. Simply relax, close your eyes, and allow an image to emerge spontaneously. Do not try to control or force the process. Simply observe what arises. The shadow figure may appear as a person, an animal, a monster, or any other symbolic representation. It may be frightening, repulsive, or even surprisingly familiar. The key is to approach the figure with an open mind and a willingness to understand its message. Why does this figure appear? What is its purpose? Now engage in dialogue. Ask the shadow figure questions, listen to its responses, and record the conversation as honestly as possible. You can speak to the figure aloud or simply engage in a mental dialogue. Ask the figure about its name, its motivations, and its purpose in your life. Listen carefully to its responses, even if they are uncomfortable or challenging. Remember, the shadow is not necessarily an enemy. It is simply a part of yourself that has been disowned or rejected. It may be trying to communicate something important, to alert you to unmet needs, or to reveal hidden aspects of your personality. Do you have the courage to hear the shadow out? After the session, reflect on the experience, identify any insights or emotions that arose, and consider how they might relate to your conscious life. What did you learn about yourself from the encounter? What emotions did the shadow figure evoke? How might this knowledge inform your behavior and relationships in the future? This process of reflection is crucial for integrating the shadow into your conscious awareness. It allows you to make sense of the experience, to identify patterns and themes, and to apply the insights to your daily life. What can you change moving forward? Consider a hypothetical example. A person struggling with persistent self-doubt decides to confront their inner critic through active imagination. They find a quiet space, close their eyes, and invite the inner critic to appear. In their imagination, they visualize their inner critic as a harsh, judgmental figure with a stern expression and a pointing finger. Summoning their courage, they ask the inner critic why it is so critical and what it is trying to protect them from. Initially, the inner critic responds with accusations and insults, highlighting all of the person's perceived flaws and failures. But as the person persists with compassion and curiosity, the inner critic begins to reveal its deeper motivations. It explains that it is afraid of failure and wants to keep the person safe from disappointment. It believes that by pointing out their shortcomings, it can prevent them from taking risks and making mistakes. But is that truly helpful? The person acknowledges the inner critic's intentions, but asserts their own desire to take risks and pursue their dreams. They explain that while they appreciate the inner critic's concern, they are no longer willing to let fear dictate their choices. They recognize that failure is a part of life, and that it is through making mistakes that they learn and grow. With newfound resolve, the person asserts their own desire to take risks and pursue their dreams. By the end of the session, the person leaves having a greater understanding of their inner critic, recognizing that it is not an enemy to be vanquished, but rather a misguided protector whose intentions can be realigned with their conscious goals. They now understand the value of the inner critic to some extent. In essence, active imagination provides a safe space to explore difficult emotions and confront disowned aspects of the self, leading to greater self-acceptance and compassion as we begin to understand the often hidden motivations behind our shadow behaviors. More than that, active imagination unlocks creative potential by integrating repressed aspects of our personality. But is active imagination the only method for shadow integration? What other avenues can we explore to unearth and integrate the hidden aspects of ourselves? And how do these methods compare to active imagination? Active imagination, as we've explored, offers a powerful avenue for engaging with the shadow, providing a structured means to give voice to repressed aspects of the self and unlock hidden potential. But is it the only path to integration? Are there other ways to navigate the complex terrain of the unconscious and befriend the darkness within? The answer, thankfully, is a resounding yes. Shadow work is a deeply personal journey, and the most effective approach will vary from individual to individual. Just as a carpenter has a variety of tools at their disposal, each suited for specific tasks, so too can we draw upon a range of methods to explore and integrate our shadows. Think of dream analysis, journaling, and therapy as valuable additions to your shadow work toolkit, offering unique perspectives and pathways to wholeness. These are not quick fixes, but rather tools for sustained exploration and dedicated work. What might these other tools offer that active imagination doesn't? How can dream analysis, journaling, and therapy complement and enhance our shadow work? Let us delve into each of these methods, exploring their unique strengths and how they can illuminate the hidden corners of our psyche. Each will offer a perspective into the shadow. Each can be used alone or in conjunction with active imagination. Consider dream analysis, a method of interpreting the symbolic language of the unconscious mind as it appears in our nightly narratives. Our dreams, often bizarre and seemingly nonsensical, are not random firings of neurons, but rather coded messages from the deepest parts of ourselves. Jung viewed dreams as a form of objective psyche, a realm where the unconscious expresses itself in symbolic form. Dreams often feature shadow figures and themes, offering invaluable insights into our repressed desires, fears, and unresolved conflicts. These figures may appear as monstrous creatures, threatening strangers, or even distorted versions of ourselves, each embodying aspects of our shadow that we struggle to acknowledge in waking life. Are you willing to meet these figures? Jung emphasized the importance of focusing on the personal and symbolic meaning of dream elements, rather than relying on fixed interpretations or universal symbols. While certain archetypes may appear across cultures and individuals, their specific meaning will always be colored by our unique personal history and experiences. A snake, for example, might represent transformation and healing for one person, while evoking fear and danger for another, depending on their individual associations. Do you see where it can become so personal? Jung also differentiated between big dreams and little dreams. Big dreams are archetypal dreams that reveal fundamental aspects of the personality, often occurring during times of major life transitions or crises. These dreams tend to be vivid, emotionally charged, and filled with symbolic imagery. Little dreams, on the other hand, are everyday dreams that reflect recent experiences and concerns, often dealing with mundane events and unresolved issues from our daily lives. Both big and little dreams can provide valuable insights into our shadow, but big dreams often offer a more profound and transformative experience. Transitioning from the nocturnal world of dreams to the conscious act of journaling, we find another potent tool for shadow exploration. Journaling offers a space to document our inner world, to record our thoughts, feelings, and experiences related to the shadow without judgment or censorship. Through regular journaling, we can begin to identify recurring patterns, triggers, and defenses that reveal hidden aspects of ourselves. But what makes journaling different from simply thinking about our experiences? The act of writing forces us to articulate our thoughts and feelings in a concrete form, making them more accessible to conscious awareness. It allows us to step back from our experiences and observe them from a more objective perspective. What kind of questions would you ask yourself when journaling? What might you explore? Consider these specific journaling prompts. What qualities do I admire in others that I secretly desire? What qualities do I despise in others that might be present in myself? What situations trigger my strongest emotional reactions? These questions are designed to help us identify those aspects of ourselves that we project onto others, both positive and negative. By recognizing these projections, we can begin to reclaim those disowned qualities and integrate them into our conscious awareness. The key to effective journaling is honesty and vulnerability. We must allow ourselves to express our thoughts and feelings without judgment, even if they are uncomfortable or shameful. The journal becomes a safe space to explore our darkest impulses, our deepest fears, and our most secret desires. Are you ready to be honest with yourself? While active imagination, dream analysis, and journaling offer valuable tools for individual shadow work, sometimes we need the guidance and support of a trained professional to navigate the most challenging aspects of our inner world. This is where therapy, particularly Jungian analysis, can prove invaluable. Therapy provides a safe and supportive space to confront difficult emotions, challenge limiting beliefs, and develop strategies for shadow integration. But why seek help from a therapist? What can a therapist offer that we cannot achieve on our own? A therapist can provide an objective perspective, helping us to identify blind spots and unconscious patterns that we may not be able to see ourselves. They can also offer tools and techniques for managing difficult emotions and developing healthier coping mechanisms. One of the key elements in therapy is the concept of transference and countertransference. Transference refers to the unconscious redirection of feelings from one person to another, often based on past relationships. In therapy, the client may unconsciously transfer feelings onto the therapist, projecting onto them qualities and expectations derived from their relationships with parents, siblings, or other significant figures. Countertransference, on the other hand, refers to the therapist's unconscious emotional reactions to the client. Both transference and countertransference can illuminate shadow dynamics, revealing unconscious patterns and unresolved conflicts. For instance, a client who consistently idealizes their therapist may be projecting their own disowned positive qualities onto them, while a therapist who feels inexplicably irritated by a client may be reacting to the client's shadow. It is important to find a therapist who is a good fit, someone with whom you feel comfortable and safe enough to explore your deepest vulnerabilities. It's perfectly acceptable to shop around for a therapist, because the therapeutic relationship must be built on trust and mutual respect. Moreover, it is especially useful to find a therapist specifically trained in Jungian analysis, as other therapeutic methodologies may not fully align with the principles of shadow work. Do you value getting this help? Thus, dream analysis, journaling, and therapy offer valuable tools for shadow integration, complementing active imagination and providing alternative pathways to wholeness. The most effective approach will vary from individual to individual, depending on their personality, their experiences, and their goals. One might journal about a particularly vivid dream, then bring those insights to therapy for further exploration. One could then take the insights from a session and use those as the focus for an active imagination session. But what happens if we choose to ignore the shadow, to leave these dark corners of our psyche unexplored? What are the potential consequences, both for ourselves and for the world around us? What is at stake if we turn away from the shadow's call? Ignoring the shadow is not an act of neutrality, but rather a dangerous gamble with potentially devastating consequences. Like a dormant volcano, repressed shadow aspects accumulate pressure over time, and the longer these aspects are ignored, the more violently they tend to erupt. Unacknowledged shadow material doesn't simply vanish. It festers in the unconscious, insidiously influencing our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. It's not a matter of if the shadow will manifest, but when and in what destructive form. This ignorance ripples outwards, affecting not only ourselves, but also those around us, creating a gathering storm of psychological distress, interpersonal conflict, and societal problems. What begins as a personal refusal to confront our inner darkness can ultimately contribute to a world consumed by shadow. Consider the individual fallout that results from a life lived in denial of the shadow. Damaged relationships become almost inevitable, as unacknowledged shadow aspects lead to projection, blame, and endless conflict. Imagine, for instance, a person who consistently accuses their partner of being controlling, when in reality they are struggling with their own deep-seated need to dominate and manipulate those around them. This projection erodes trust, creates distance, and ultimately poisons the relationship, leaving both partners feeling misunderstood and resentful. How many relationships crumble under the weight of such unconscious projections? Furthermore, repressed shadow qualities limit creativity, spontaneity, and authenticity, hindering personal growth and fulfillment. Take the example of someone who is terrified of expressing their anger or asserting their needs. They may become resentful, passive, and ultimately unfulfilled in their career and personal life, unable to take on leadership roles or constantly being taken advantage of. This denial of their own power diminishes their potential and leaves them feeling trapped and powerless. And let us not forget the psychological distress that arises from unintegrated shadow material, manifesting as anxiety, depression, and a whole host of other mental health issues. Think of the person who experiences chronic feelings of guilt and shame, stemming from repressed childhood experiences or unacceptable thoughts. These feelings can consume their life, preventing them from experiencing joy and leaving them in a constant state of inner turmoil. But the consequences extend far beyond the individual, for the collective shadow can wreak havoc on society as a whole. One of the most insidious manifestations of the collective shadow is scapegoating and prejudice. Unacknowledged societal anxieties and fears are projected onto minority groups, leading to discrimination, oppression, and violence. Consider the historical example of the persecution of witches in early modern Europe. Societal fears about female power and sexuality were projected onto marginalized women, leading to their torture and execution. These so-called witches became a convenient outlet for societal anxieties, a dark mirror reflecting back the repressed fears of the collective. Or consider the rise of extremist political movements, where unacknowledged societal grievances and frustrations are channeled into hateful rhetoric and violent actions against perceived enemies. These movements thrive by exploiting the collective shadow, offering simplistic solutions and scapegoating vulnerable groups. We also see the shadow at play in environmental destruction, where disconnection from nature and a lack of empathy for future generations lead to unsustainable practices and the relentless exploitation of natural resources. The pursuit of short-term economic gains is prioritized over the long-term health of the planet, reflecting a profound disregard for the interconnectedness of all living things. It is also important to acknowledge the seductive nature of the shadow. It promises power, freedom, and excitement, especially to those who feel constrained by societal norms or their own internal restrictions. Like the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden, the shadow represents the parts of ourselves that we are told are bad or wrong, making them all the more tempting. This allure is part of what makes the shadow so difficult to confront. Charismatic leaders can exploit this, appealing to people's repressed desires and offering them a sense of belonging and purpose, even if it comes at the expense of others. Think of a cult leader who promises followers enlightenment and salvation in exchange for complete obedience and sacrifice. Such leaders often prey on vulnerable individuals, offering them a distorted sense of power and control while ultimately fulfilling their own shadow desires. However, succumbing to the shadow's seduction ultimately leads to destruction and disillusionment. It is a false sense of power, a fleeting moment of gratification that leaves us emptier and more lost than before. It hollows you out, leaving an empty shell. In essence, ignoring the shadow, whether individually or collectively, carries a steep price. It leads to damaged relationships, diminished potential, psychological distress, societal discord, and destructive ideologies. The shadow is not something to be feared, but something to be understood and integrated. Acknowledging the shadow is essential for living an authentic, fulfilling life, and for creating a more just and sustainable world. But how can we resist the shadow's seduction and harness its power for good? What are the specific steps we can take to integrate these disowned aspects of ourselves and create a more conscious and compassionate world? To what extent are leaders responsible for the darkness they unleash, and how much does society project its own shadow onto them? Leaders, like all individuals, harbor a shadow, and their unacknowledged negative traits can have devastating consequences on a massive scale. Leadership provides unique opportunities for shadow expression, as leaders wield power and influence over others, impacting countless lives. However, followers often play a crucial role in enabling a leader's shadow through projection, idealization, and a willingness to overlook unethical behavior, essentially becoming complicit in the unfolding drama. Consider the potential for corruption when those in power are not held accountable, or the seductive allure of a leader who promises easy solutions to complex problems. Like a house of cards, the entire system can come crashing down when the leader's shadow is allowed to run rampant. Charisma, often mistaken for mere charm, is in many ways the ability to tap into the unconscious desires and fears of others, including their shadow aspects. Manipulative leaders often project an image of strength, confidence, and even ruthlessness, which can be incredibly attractive to individuals who feel powerless or insecure, promising security and purpose. This resonates deeply with those who yearn for a strong figure to guide them, even if that guidance leads them down a perilous path. These leaders may consciously or unconsciously exploit people's repressed aggression, resentment, and desire for belonging, channeling these emotions into destructive actions. Think of a demagogue whipping up a crowd into a frenzy, inciting violence and hatred against a scapegoated group. It is crucial to differentiate between authentic leaders who inspire through genuine vision and integrity, and manipulative leaders who exploit the shadow for personal gain. Authentic leaders foster empowerment, while manipulative leaders cultivate dependence. How can we tell the difference? By looking at the leader's actions, motivations, and the impact they have on those around them. Do they empower or control? Do they inspire or intimidate? Do they serve or exploit? Authentic leaders stand on integrity, while manipulative ones utilize exploitation. Adolf Hitler serves as a chilling case study of a leader who embodied and exploited the collective shadow. His personal shadow traits his paranoia, his rage, his insatiable need for control, his tendency to scapegoat, and his messianic complex were all glaringly apparent. Furthermore, these traits resonated deeply with the collective shadow of post-World War I Germany. German society was scarred by economic hardship, national humiliation stemming from the Treaty of Versailles, and a profound longing for strong leadership to restore their wounded pride. Hitler skillfully manipulated these societal anxieties and repressed desires, promising a return to greatness, a restoration of order, and a convenient scapegoat for Germany's problems, the Jewish people. He tapped into the collective resentment and channeled it into a terrifying force of hatred and destruction. However, it is important to note that the German collective shadow already had deep roots centuries prior, stemming from the various religious and political conflicts during the preceding centuries. Hitler's rise to power was not solely the result of his own actions, but also the result of a collective failure to recognize and confront the shadow within German society. What would have happened if the German people had recognized and confronted the darkness within themselves? rather than projecting it onto an external enemy? Could the horrors of the Holocaust have been averted? These are questions that haunt us to this day, and their lessons continue to be relevant. From Hitler to the internet, it becomes apparent that charismatic leaders can be incredibly dangerous when they appeal to our basest instincts and offer simplistic solutions to incredibly complex problems. The lessons learned from Hitler emphasizes the need for critical thinking, skepticism, and a willingness to challenge authority, especially in times of social unrest or uncertainty. But how does the shadow manifest in today's world, in the absence of a single, all-powerful leader like Hitler? Can the collective shadow be expressed through more diffuse, decentralized forces, such as online communities or political movements? What role does technology play in amplifying and distorting the shadow's influence? We will delve deeper into these questions, exploring how the internet provides new avenues for shadow expression, while the underlying dynamics of projection, denial, and scapegoating remain disturbingly the same, and how a single charismatic leader can reach through the digital waves and ignite that shadow. Is the internet a new frontier for the collective shadow? And if so, how is it being expressed? Just as Hitler channeled Germany's collective shadow in the 20th century, the internet has become a fertile ground for the expression of collective darkness in the 21st. The internet, with its promise of connection and democratization of information, has paradoxically become a space where anonymity, rapid communication, and global reach create unprecedented opportunities for shadow projection and collective behavior, often in ways that mirror the destructive forces of the past. Online hate groups, flourishing in the digital shadows, can be seen as a contemporary manifestation of the same destructive forces that fueled historical atrocities, albeit in a decentralized and often more insidious form. The internet allows these groups to transcend geographical boundaries, connecting individuals from around the world who share similar prejudices and resentments, forming a digital hive mind fueled by negativity. Several psychological factors contribute to the amplification of shadow expression within online hate groups. One crucial element is deindividuation, a psychological phenomenon where individuals experience a loss of self-awareness and personal responsibility within a group setting, particularly when anonymity is high. Online anonymity, afforded by pseudonyms and obscured IP addresses, allows individuals to shed their inhibitions and engage in behaviors they would never consider in their offline lives. They become disinhibited. In addition to deindividuation, groupthink plays a significant role. Groupthink describes the psychological drive for consensus at any cost that suppresses dissent and critical appraisal in a group. It is the tendency for groups to prioritize conformity and consensus over critical thinking, leading to poor decisions and the suppression of dissenting opinions. Within online hate groups, groupthink amplifies existing biases and prejudices, creating an environment where extreme views are normalized and dissenting voices are silenced through harassment and intimidation. Moreover, echo chambers and filter bubbles exacerbate these effects, creating online environments where individuals are primarily exposed to information that confirms their existing beliefs. These self-reinforcing feedback loops intensify polarization and hostility, making it increasingly difficult for individuals to engage in constructive dialogue or consider alternative perspectives. Consider, for example, online neo-Nazi groups. These digital communities actively promote racist and anti-Semitic ideologies, glorify violence, and recruit new members through propaganda and manipulation. They often employ coded symbols and language to signal their allegiance and dehumanize their targets, further solidifying their group identity and reinforcing their hateful beliefs. They believe the lie. Similarly, online misogynistic communities, such as the incel movement, short for involuntary celibates, provide a space for men to express hatred and resentment towards women, often promoting violence and sexual assault and rationalizing their behavior through distorted ideologies of male entitlement. The incel ideology often includes a victim-blaming mentality, where women are blamed for men's lack of romantic success, revealing the shadow's desire to exert power and control over others. These groups often engage in coordinated harassment campaigns, targeting individuals and groups with threats, doxing, publishing someone's personal information online, and other forms of online abuse, illustrating the shadow's impulsive and destructive nature. According to a study by the Anti-Defamation League, ADL, online hate speech has increased significantly in recent years, with a corresponding rise in hate crimes targeting marginalized communities. For instance, the 2019 Christchurch mask shootings in New Zealand were directly linked to online radicalization and the spread of white supremacist ideologies on social media platforms, exemplifying the devastating real-world consequences of unchecked online hate. In essence, online hate groups represent a potent manifestation of the collective shadow, amplified by the unique characteristics of the digital landscape. The dangers of anonymity, deindividuation, and echo chambers cannot be overstated, as they create an environment where hateful ideologies can flourish and violence can be incited. However, it is crucial to remember that the internet is not inherently evil. Like any tool, it can be used for both good and evil, and it is up to us to cultivate critical thinking, media literacy, and empathy in navigating the online world. What role does the individual play in all of this, and how can we prevent ourselves from falling prey to the digital shadow? How can we cultivate empathy and understanding in an online world that seems designed to promote division and hate? We will soon explore practical strategies for cultivating online empathy and promoting responsible digital citizenship. But first, it is paramount to understand the underlying psychology of our digital interactions, and more importantly, ourselves. In an age dominated by screens and virtual interactions, is true empathy even possible online? Or is it just a mirage shimmering on the surface of our digital devices? Online empathy, at its core, is the conscious and deliberate effort to understand and share the feelings of others in the digital realm. It's not merely about being agreeable or passively accepting differing opinions, but about actively striving to perceive the world from another person's vantage point, even when their views clash with our own. But can we truly grasp someone's emotional state when we're limited to written words, emojis, and carefully curated profiles? The digital landscape presents unique challenges to empathy. The absence of nonverbal cues, such as facial expressions, body language, and tone of voice, makes it easy to misinterpret intentions and miss subtle emotional nuances. Anonymity and deindividuation, often afforded by the internet, can further exacerbate this problem, as individuals feel less accountable for their actions and words when shielded by a screen. After all, it's easier to hurl insults from behind a mask than to engage in a face-to-face conversation. However, cultivating online empathy is not only possible, but essential for fostering connection, reducing conflict, promoting understanding, and creating a more positive and inclusive online environment. It allows us to bridge divides, build communities of trust, and counteract the forces of polarization that threaten to tear us apart. But what are the specific obstacles that stand in the way of online empathy, and how can we overcome them? Several cognitive biases can significantly hinder our ability to empathize with others online. One of the most prevalent is confirmation bias, the ingrained human tendency to seek out and interpret information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs while simultaneously ignoring or dismissing contradictory evidence. In the digital world, this bias is amplified by algorithms that curate personalized content feeds, creating echo chambers where we are primarily exposed to views that reinforce our own. But how can we break free from these filter bubbles and actively seek out diverse perspectives? Another significant obstacle is in group bias, the inclination to favor members of our own social group while viewing outsiders with suspicion or hostility. This bias can manifest online as tribalism, where individuals identify strongly with particular online communities and demonize those who belong to different groups. Challenging the notion that your group is inherently superior is the first step toward overcoming the destructive tendency to view outsiders with suspicion. Furthermore, attribution bias leads us to attribute negative behavior to the inherent character of others, while attributing our own negative behavior to situational factors. For example, we might assume that someone who posts an angry comment is inherently aggressive, while excusing our own angry posts as a justified response to provocation. To combat this bias, it is crucial to consider the situational factors that might be influencing others' behaviors and be more critical of our own justifications. So, what practical steps can we take to bridge the divide and foster greater understanding in our online interactions? Active listening is paramount. This means paying close attention to what others are saying, both verbally, the literal words they use, and non-verbally, tone of voice, emoji usage, and other contextual cues. Summarize their points to ensure you understand them correctly and ask clarifying questions to avoid misunderstandings. Moreover, using I statements allows you to express your own feelings and needs without blaming or accusing others. Instead of saying, "You're always attacking me," try saying, "I feel attacked," when you use that tone of voice. Avoiding name-calling and personal attacks allows us to focus on the issues at hand, rather than resorting to insults or ad hominem arguments, and maintaining a mindful tone, remembering that written communication can easily be misinterpreted, is vital. Use clear, concise language and avoid sarcasm or passive aggressiveness. Also, knowing when to take a break can be valuable. If you're feeling overwhelmed or triggered, step away from the conversation and take some time to cool down before responding. It is important to remember that online interactions are not always conducive to productive dialogue, and it's okay to disengage if the interaction is harmful. Navigating the digital world also requires an awareness of trolling and online harassment. Trolling is intentionally provoking or upsetting others online for one's own amusement, and trolls often seek attention and validation through negative interactions. Explain that trolls often seek attention and validation through negative interactions. In contrast, online harassment is a form of cyberbullying that involves repeated and unwanted contact, threats, or intimidation. Harassment is a serious issue that can have devastating consequences for victims. But what can you do? Often, the most effective way to deal with trolls is to simply ignore them. Don't feed the trolls. However, in cases of online harassment, it is essential to take action by blocking harassers and reporting their behavior to the platform administrator. It is also important to document the abuse, keeping records of all harassing messages and interactions. Seek support from friends, family, or a therapist about your experiences. Setting boundaries and protecting your own mental health when dealing with online negativity should be a priority. It is vital to acknowledge that individual actions alone are not sufficient to address the pervasive problem of online hate and polarization. Systemic changes are also necessary. But what are those changes? Social media platforms play a significant role in amplifying harmful content, and there is a growing need for greater accountability and regulation. But where is the line between responsibility and censorship? Promoting media literacy education in schools and communities can teach people how to critically evaluate online information and resist manipulation. Cultivating diversity and inclusion in online spaces can help to counter echo chambers and foster greater understanding and empathy. Ongoing research and dialogue about the ethical implications of technology and its impact on society are crucial for creating a healthier digital world. So, we've explored practical strategies for cultivating online empathy and promoting responsible digital citizenship. But is online empathy simply about being nice? or does it require a more profound shift in perspective? Resisting the digital shadow demands ongoing self-reflection, critical thinking, and a commitment to creating a more positive and inclusive online world. And online empathy requires us to actively work to understand and connect with others, even when it's difficult. But is the shadow purely a destructive force, or does it also hold the potential for creativity, growth, and positive change? Can we learn to harness the energy of the shadow for good, both in our individual lives and in the wider world? In the next section, we will delve into the hidden treasures within the shadow and explore how to integrate them into our conscious selves, unlocking their transformative power. So, is the shadow merely a monstrous entity lurking in the depths of our unconscious? Or could it be that we have gravely misjudged this disowned aspect of ourselves? Challenging the conventional perception of the shadow as purely negative is essential for unlocking its transformative potential. What if the very qualities we deem bad or unacceptable are in fact sources of creativity, passion, and resilience waiting to be consciously integrated? Might the shadow, like a diamond in the rough, contain valuable qualities that can be polished and used for good? Consider the metaphor of a vast, unmapped territory within ourselves. This territory, the shadow, is often perceived as a dark and forbidding wilderness, a place to be avoided at all costs. But what if this wilderness holds hidden springs of creativity, untapped reserves of assertiveness, and unexplored pathways to passion? By venturing into the shadow, we embark on a journey of reclamation, retrieving disowned aspects of ourselves that hold the key to a more authentic and fulfilling life. Jung writes, "Unfortunately, there can be no doubt that man is, on the whole, less good than he imagines himself or wants to be." Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. But what if this density contains not only darkness, but also untapped power? What if the blackness conceals a potential brilliance? By embracing the totality of our being, including the shadow, we move closer to wholeness, to individuation. Unveiling the shadow's gifts requires a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves. One such gift is assertiveness, the ability to stand up for oneself and advocate for one's needs without resorting to aggression or domination. Repressed assertiveness often manifests as passivity, leading to resentment and a sense of powerlessness. But when integrated consciously, assertiveness empowers individuals to advocate for themselves and others, setting healthy boundaries and navigating conflicts with confidence and integrity. Can the person who has never felt anger truly understand justice? Creativity also lies dormant within the shadow, waiting to be awakened. The capacity for imagination, innovation, and artistic expression is often stifled by societal expectations and self-imposed limitations. Repressed creativity can lead to stagnation, a lack of passion, and a feeling of being disconnected from one's true self. But when embraced, creativity allows individuals to express themselves authentically, to find innovative solutions to problems, and to contribute to the world in unique and meaningful ways. Is the eccentric genius not a prime example of the shadow's creative potential unleashed? Furthermore, passion, the intensity of emotion and desire that drives us to pursue our goals and connect with others, resides within the shadow. Repressed passion can lead to apathy, a lack of vitality, and a sense of being adrift in life. But when integrated, passion fuels our purpose, enriches our relationships, and ignites a fire within us that propels us forward. The individual who has never faced despair can never truly savor joy. Intuition, the ability to perceive and understand things without conscious reasoning, is another invaluable gift found within the shadow. Repressed intuition can lead to poor decision-making, a disconnect from our inner wisdom, and a reliance on external validation. But when integrated, intuition allows us to trust our instincts, navigate complex situations with greater clarity, and tap into a deeper source of knowledge. But how can we harness the power of intuition without falling prey to irrationality? These are but a few of the hidden treasures that await us in the depths of our shadow and are readily available to those brave enough to look. To illustrate the transformative power of shadow integration, let us consider a few compelling examples. While Walter White from Breaking Bad serves as a cautionary tale, a stark warning about the perils of unchecked shadow expression, other characters demonstrate the potential for positive integration. Walter White's descent into ruthlessness and ambition highlights the destructive consequences of embracing one's shadow without conscious awareness or ethical boundaries. However, characters like Batman, who channel their inner darkness into a force for justice, or Lisbeth Salander from The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, who uses her aggression and hacking skills to protect the vulnerable, offer more nuanced examples of shadow integration. Batman's vigilantism, born from childhood trauma, allows him to confront the criminal underworld with a unique understanding and unwavering resolve. Lisbeth Salander's fierce independence and rebellious spirit, forged in the fires of abuse, enable her to defend the defenseless and challenge societal injustices. What distinguishes these characters from Walter White is their ability to harness their shadow qualities for a greater purpose, guided by a strong moral compass and a commitment to justice. From mythology, consider the figure of Kali from Hinduism. Kali is often depicted as a fearsome goddess of death and destruction, dripping with blood and brandishing weapons. However, beneath this terrifying exterior lies a powerful force for transformation, liberation, and the feminine. Kali represents the destruction of illusion, the shattering of false attachments, and the stripping away of all that is inauthentic. She is the embodiment of fierce love, a mother who will stop at nothing to protect her children. Her perceived negative traits are, in fact, constructive forces that clear the way for new beginnings and deeper truths. Consider the snake, a dangerous creature, but whose venom can provide healing. In Jungian psychology, case studies abound with individuals who have successfully integrated their shadow qualities in therapy. One patient, plagued by repressed anger, learns to channel it into healthy assertiveness, setting boundaries and advocating for their needs in a constructive manner. Another, burdened by a fear of vulnerability, embraces their emotional openness, forming deeper connections with others and experiencing greater intimacy in their relationships. What do these stories tell us about the human capacity for transformation? In essence, shadow integration is not about becoming perfect or eliminating our flaws. Rather, it is about embracing the totality of our being, acknowledging both our light and our darkness, and harnessing the energy of the shadow for good. By integrating our shadow qualities, we become more authentic, resilient, and creative individuals, better equipped to navigate the complexities of life and contribute to the world in meaningful ways. This process requires ongoing self-reflection, compassion, and a willingness to embrace the unknown, for the shadow is a vast and mysterious territory, full of both perils and possibilities. Shadow integration is a lifelong journey, not a destination. The unexamined life is not worth living, and we can only truly live once we embrace the totality of our beings. While the shadow holds great potential, it also requires careful management and ethical consideration. Like any powerful force, it can be used for good or for ill. Unconscious shadow expression can lead to destructive behaviors, harmful relationships, and societal injustices. Therefore, conscious awareness and responsible action are essential for harnessing the shadow's energy in a positive way. The power to destroy is also the power to create, and we must always be wary of where we focus our energies. Now that we understand the positive potential of the shadow, how can we begin to harness its energy for good in our own lives? What are the specific steps we can take to integrate these disowned aspects of ourselves and create a more balanced and fulfilling existence? What are the dangers and benefits of shadow work? These are the questions we must now explore, unlocking the practical path to transformation and wholeness. We often avoid things that make us uncomfortable, but could this avoidance be precisely what keeps us trapped? Psychologists call this the ostrich effect, the tendency to bury our heads in the sand when faced with unpleasant information. But just as an ostrich ultimately cannot escape reality, so too do we find that avoiding our shadow only exacerbates its power over us. Think of your shadow like a cluttered attic. Acknowledging the mess feels overwhelming, so you simply shut the door and ignore it. Over time, the clutter accumulates, becoming more and more daunting to address. This avoidance provides temporary relief, but it ultimately prevents you from reclaiming the space and integrating it into your home. Similarly, when we instinctively turn away from the disowned aspects of ourselves, we create a psychic backlog that festers in the unconscious. The more we avoid, the more powerful and distorted the shadow becomes, influencing our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in subtle, often destructive ways. This build-up manifests as unexplained anxieties, sudden outbursts of anger, or persistent feelings of inadequacy. Are we not then responsible for tending to the darkest corners of our inner landscape? Conscious awareness is the foundation upon which shadow integration is built. This awareness involves cultivating a non-judgmental curiosity towards our inner world, including our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. It is not about suppressing or eliminating negative emotions, but rather about acknowledging them, understanding their origins, and integrating them into our conscious understanding of ourselves. Mindfulness, the practice of paying attention to the present moment without getting carried away by thoughts or emotions, is a powerful tool for cultivating this awareness. By observing our thoughts and feelings without judgment, we can begin to detach from them and assess them more rationally. Jung writes, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." How can we take control of our destiny if we remain blind to the forces that shape it? Self-reflection is another essential component of conscious awareness. Journaling, meditation, and therapy can all help us uncover hidden aspects of ourselves. Consider these journal prompts. What are my most frequent negative thoughts? What situations trigger the strongest emotional reactions in me? What qualities do I admire or despise in others? By exploring these questions with honesty and vulnerability, we can begin to identify patterns and themes that point to our shadow aspects. Remember, conscious awareness is not about self-flagellation or dwelling on our shortcomings. It is about understanding ourselves more fully, with compassion and acceptance. Von Franz writes, "The shadow is a living part of the personality and therefore wants to live with it in some way. It cannot be argued with, reasoned with, or bribed." Can we learn to live with our shadow without being consumed by it? Psychological projection, a concept first articulated by Sigmund Freud, is a key mechanism by which the shadow operates. We often see our own disowned qualities in others, judging them harshly for traits that we secretly possess or fear within ourselves. Accusing someone of being selfish when we are secretly envious of their success. Judging someone for being overly emotional when we are suppressing our own feelings. Criticizing someone for being dishonest when we are struggling with our own integrity. These are all examples of projection in everyday life. But here's what most people miss. Recognizing and owning our projections is a powerful tool for shadow integration. Owning your projections means recognizing that what we dislike in others is often a reflection of our own shadow. It requires a willingness to examine our emotional reactions and ask ourselves if we might possess those qualities ourselves. Pay attention to your emotional reactions to others. What qualities trigger you the most? Ask yourself if you might possess those qualities yourself, perhaps in a less obvious or more socially acceptable form. Challenge your judgments and try to see the other person's perspective, recognizing that everyone is struggling with their own shadow in their own way. Take responsibility for your own feelings and reactions rather than blaming others. This is a difficult but essential step towards self-awareness and shadow integration. As Jung stated, the shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases. Why then do we insist on measuring others by our own yardstick? True integration demands a brave and direct confrontation with the disowned aspects of the self, acknowledging their existence and impact. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of shadow work, as it requires us to face our deepest fears and insecurities. One must bravely face the disowned aspects of the self, acknowledging their existence and impact. Methods for safe shadow confrontation include active imagination, dream work, journaling, and, ideally, guided therapy with a Jungian analyst. Active imagination involves engaging in a dialogue with the shadow through visualization or creative expression. Dream work involves analyzing our dreams for symbolic representations of the shadow. Journaling provides a space to explore our thoughts and feelings about the shadow in a safe and private setting. But what if the shadow refuses to speak? What if it appears as a monstrous figure that terrifies us? These are common roadblocks in shadow work, and they require self-compassion and patience to navigate. Remember, the shadow is not inherently evil. It is simply a part of ourselves that has been disowned and repressed. Approach it with curiosity and a willingness to understand its perspective. Set realistic goals. Shadow work is a marathon, not a sprint. It requires ongoing effort and a commitment to self-discovery. Above all, seek guidance from a qualified therapist who can provide support and expertise along the way. Why is it that we so readily seek help for physical ailments, yet shy away from addressing our psychological wounds? In essence, the journey of shadow integration begins with awareness, progresses through ownership, and culminates in confrontation. This process is cyclical and iterative, a continuous journey of self-discovery and growth. It is not a one-time fix, but rather an ongoing practice of self-reflection and integration. Shadow work can be difficult and painful, but the rewards authenticity, wholeness, and freedom are well worth the effort. This effort allows us to reclaim disowned parts of ourselves and live more authentically and fully. With this foundation in place, how can we move beyond simply acknowledging the shadow to actively integrating its energies into our conscious lives? What specific practices can help us transform our darkness into a source of strength and creativity? We will now delve into the alchemical process of transformation. Can we truly decode our dreams to reveal the hidden aspects of ourselves, those long-buried truths that shape our waking lives? The exploration of dreams has captivated humanity for centuries, but beyond simple interpretation lies a potent technique known as dream amplification, a method to not only understand, but actively engage with the unconscious. Is it possible that our dreams hold the key to unlocking our shadow selves? Dream amplification is not merely about deciphering symbols. It is a process of actively expanding upon dream imagery to reveal deeper connections and engage in a dialogue with the unconscious. It is best used after building a solid foundation of shadow work through other means, such as journaling, active imagination, or therapy, because one must be prepared for the revelations it may bring. This is not a passive exercise, but rather an active exploration of the symbolic language of the unconscious, a deep dive into the hidden corners of the psyche. Unlike simple dream interpretation, which might focus on assigning fixed meanings to symbols, dream amplification seeks to uncover the unique and personal associations that each symbol holds for the individual dreamer. It is an alchemical process, transforming the raw material of the dream into a richer understanding of the self. Are you ready to begin? The mechanics of dream amplification involve a series of specific steps, each designed to deepen our engagement with the unconscious. First, one must recall and record the dream vividly, preserving its imagery, emotions, and narrative structure. The more detail that is captured, the easier it will be to amplify the dream later. Write down everything you can remember, no matter how strange or insignificant it may seem. Second, identify key symbols, pinpointing recurring figures, objects, or scenarios that hold strong emotional resonance. Certain elements will naturally stand out, drawing your attention and sparking your curiosity. What are the images that linger in your mind long after you awaken? Third, one must amplify with associations, engaging in free association around each symbol, exploring personal and cultural connections, myths, folklore, art, history, or any relevant field. Look into all meanings and stories connected to each symbol, allowing your mind to wander and make unexpected connections. Fourth, construct the narrative, weaving the amplified associations into a cohesive narrative, seeking a deeper understanding of the dream's message and its potential relationship to your shadow. Craft a new narrative around the original dream, incorporating the insights gained through amplification. Fifth, engage in active imagination, using the amplified dream as a launching point to directly engage with the figures and themes that emerged. Converse with them, question them, and allow them to express themselves freely without judgment or censorship. Finally, document insights, recording all revelations and noting how they connect to conscious life and waking challenges. Take detailed notes of the results and new understandings, paying attention to any shifts in your perspective or emotional state. Are you open to where it may lead? To illustrate how dream amplification can reveal shadow aspects, consider this hypothetical dream. A person is trapped in a dark forest, pursued by a shadowy figure with no face. On the surface, this dream might seem like a simple nightmare, but through amplification, its deeper meaning can be unveiled. First, we examine the forest. The dark forest could represent the unconscious itself, a place of unknown dangers and hidden potential. It is a realm where the light of consciousness fades and the primal instincts hold sway. Next, we consider the shadowy figure. Researching faceless figures in mythology, we might find that they often represent the shadow itself, the unknown or repressed aspects of the self. This figure embodies all that we disown and fear within ourselves. Finally, we examine the pursuit. This could symbolize the dreamer avoiding their own shadow, running from parts of themselves that they are unwilling to acknowledge. They are trying to escape the darkness within, but the shadow, like a persistent echo, continues to follow. Connecting these amplifications to shadow themes, we begin to see that the dream speaks to the dreamer's fear of the unknown, their self-avoidance, and the untapped potential that lies dormant within their unconscious. The dreamer may be suppressing certain emotions or desires, leading to inner conflict and a sense of being haunted by their own shadow. But could this dream be an invitation to confront these repressed aspects and integrate them into their conscious awareness? Dream amplification provides a unique and potent path to engage with the shadow and its hidden aspects. However, this technique should be approached with caution, self-compassion, and respect for the unconscious. It is a powerful tool that can unlock deep insights, but it can also stir up difficult emotions and challenge our carefully constructed defenses. It requires a willingness to confront our deepest fears and insecurities and a commitment to self-discovery. As we delve into these potent tools, it begs the question, how do we ensure that our quest for wholeness doesn't inadvertently unleash harm, either upon ourselves or those around us? Where do we draw the line, and how do we wield this power responsibly? This question will be explored further in the upcoming section, where we will delve into the ethical considerations surrounding shadow integration and its potential impact on relationships. Can the journey towards personal wholeness inadvertently inflict pain on others? It's a question that demands careful consideration as we delve into the depths of shadow integration, a path often lauded for its transformative potential. Is it possible that this process, intended to heal and liberate, can have unintended negative consequences on those around us? The answer, as with most things psychological, lies in nuance and a delicate balance. Think of a surgeon, meticulously trained and driven by the intention to heal. Their skill can mend broken bones, remove life-threatening tumors, and restore function to damaged organs. Yet, even the most skilled surgeon inflicts pain, leaves scars, and disrupts the body's natural equilibrium in the process of healing. Similarly, exploring and integrating our shadow aspects, those disowned parts of ourselves, can disrupt established relationships and trigger unforeseen emotional reactions, a process that can be initially painful. Shadow work can be initially painful, but is it worth the risk? Focusing solely on personal growth without considering the impact on others can lead to selfishness, recklessness, and a disregard for boundaries. This is not the intention of shadow work, so how can that be avoided? Ethical shadow work requires a delicate balance between self-exploration and responsible action, a tightrope walk between personal liberation and relational responsibility. Shadow integration can profoundly affect our relationships with others. As we become more aware of our shadow aspects, we may start to challenge existing relationship dynamics, leading to conflict or discomfort. Patterns that were once accepted as normal may suddenly feel suffocating or inauthentic, and bringing these unconscious issues to the conscious can alter the relationship irrevocably. This can be confusing, even destabilizing, for those closest to us, who may not understand the changes we are undergoing. Furthermore, there exists the concept of relational shadows, the shared, unspoken patterns of behavior and projection that exist within relationships. These are the unconscious agreements and unspoken roles that each person plays, often reflecting their own unacknowledged shadow aspects. Both parties have a shadow, so how can the shadows work together? A relationship may be built on codependent patterns, a mutual agreement to remain in the shadows. But what happens when one person seeks the light? Changes in one person's shadow integration can trigger strong reactions in others, particularly if those reactions are rooted in their own unacknowledged shadow aspects. This can manifest as defensiveness, resistance, or even outright hostility, as the other person unconsciously seeks to maintain the status quo. Shadow work changes the entire relationship dynamic. The partner may be content to remain in the shadows and will do whatever they can to pull you back in. Therefore, it is imperative to communicate openly and honestly with partners, friends, and family members throughout the shadow integration process. Sharing our experiences, explaining our motivations, and actively listening to their concerns can help to navigate these complex relational dynamics. Consider the overly assertive partner, an individual who, after beginning shadow work, becomes overly assertive, dominating conversations and disregarding their partner's needs in the name of authenticity. While assertiveness is a positive trait, the sudden shift can be jarring and create resentment if not communicated effectively. What are the warning signs, and how can one pull back? The partner may feel unheard, invalidated, and even attacked, leading to a breakdown in communication and intimacy. Or consider the newly authentic friend, a person who starts expressing their true feelings without considering the impact on their friends, leading to hurt feelings and damaged friendships. For example, they may become overly critical or share extremely personal details without any filter, creating discomfort and pushing others away. Explain the difference between authenticity and emotional dumping. This is not genuine authenticity, but rather an unleashing of unfiltered shadow content without regard for the well-being of others. Then there's the politically awakened family member, an individual who, after confronting their own biases, becomes preachy and judgmental towards family members who hold different political views, creating tension and division within the family. The family member's shadow is causing them to preach. Their newfound awareness, while valuable, is wielded as a weapon, alienating those closest to them. And finally, there is the case of the divorcing couple, two partners who, after years of repressing their individual needs and desires, suddenly explode with demands for change, leading to the breakdown of the marriage. One partner's integration may cause the other to see how the relationship dynamics don't suit their needs. Years of repressed anger or resentment may surface, creating a chasm that cannot be bridged. It is important to emphasize that these examples are not intended to discourage shadow integration, but to highlight the importance of responsible and ethical practice. Shadow integration can lead to greater authenticity and fulfillment it's crucial to consider the impact on others and communicate openly and honestly. Integration isn't about hurting others to help yourself. Shadow work requires self-awareness, empathy, and a willingness to adjust our behavior based on the needs of our relationships. How can we navigate these complex relational dynamics while still honoring our own journey of shadow integration? What specific boundaries can we set to protect ourselves and others from harm? And how can we cultivate compassion for those who may be triggered by our growth? The exploration of boundaries will be explored next. How can we navigate these complex relational dynamics while still honoring our own journey of shadow integration? What specific boundaries can we set to protect ourselves and others from harm? And how can we cultivate compassion for those who may be triggered by our growth? While the pursuit of shadow integration is a noble endeavor, promising greater self-awareness and wholeness, it is critical to acknowledge that it can become problematic if pursued without regard for the well-being of others. Imagine a tightrope walker, skillfully navigating a precarious path high above the ground. They require intense focus, unwavering balance, and years of training. But even the most accomplished tightrope walker relies on a safety net, a crucial safeguard that prevents a catastrophic fall. In the context of shadow work, healthy boundaries act as that safety net, preventing a descent into self-centeredness, recklessness, or the potential to inflict unintended harm on those around us. The fall, in this analogy, represents the potential for shadow integration to devolve into self-justification, entitlement, or a disregard for the needs and feelings of others, leading to damaged relationships and ethical breaches. It is important to remember that the intention behind shadow work truly matters. Integration should ultimately lead to greater empathy, compassion, and a deeper understanding of our interconnectedness, rather than serving as a justification for harmful behavior. The key to ethical shadow work, therefore, lies in setting and maintaining healthy boundaries, both for ourselves and for those around us. Defining the lines. What are healthy boundaries? Boundaries can be defined as the limits we establish in our relationships to protect our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being. These limits are not rigid walls designed to isolate us from others, but rather permeable membranes that allow for connection while preventing exploitation, abuse, or the erosion of our sense of self. Walls keep everyone out, fostering isolation and preventing intimacy, while healthy boundaries function as selective filters, allowing for appropriate levels of engagement while safeguarding our vulnerabilities. It is crucial to distinguish between different types of boundaries to effectively navigate the complexities of shadow integration. Physical boundaries involve respecting personal space, touch, and privacy. This means being mindful of physical contact, avoiding unwanted intrusions into one's personal space, and honoring requests for physical distance. Emotional boundaries entail not taking responsibility for other people's feelings, and not allowing others to take responsibility for our own emotional states. This means recognizing that each individual is responsible for managing their own emotions and avoiding the trap of trying to fix or control the feelings of others. Mental boundaries involve protecting our own thoughts, beliefs, and values from undue influence. This includes being discerning about the information we consume, resisting the pressure to conform to others' opinions, and maintaining the right to our own independent thought. Time boundaries involve allocating sufficient time for self-care, rest, and personal pursuits, and not allowing others to encroach on our schedule without our explicit permission. This means prioritizing our own needs and recognizing that saying no to excessive demands is an act of self-preservation, and paradoxically can improve your value to those around you as you become more of a rare commodity. Setting boundaries is not selfish, but rather an act of self-respect and a fundamental requirement for healthy relationships. Boundary breakdown. Case studies in shadow overreach to illustrate how shadow integration can inadvertently lead to boundary violations. Let's consider some specific examples. First, there is the oversharing integrator, an individual who, after embracing their vulnerability and shadow aspects, begins sharing extremely personal details with acquaintances, colleagues, or even strangers, making others feel uncomfortable, burdened, or even violated. This violates emotional boundaries because the integrator is seeking validation, attention, or a sense of connection without considering the other person's capacity or willingness to receive such intimate information. They are overstepping the unspoken social contract that governs appropriate levels of self-disclosure. Then there is the brutally honest integrator, a person who, after confronting their own anger, resentment, or critical tendencies, becomes overly blunt and critical with others, justifying their behavior as just being honest. "I'm just being real" is a common phrase they might use. This violates both emotional and mental boundaries, as the integrator is using honesty as a weapon, inflicting pain without regard for the other person's feelings or beliefs. Honesty, when delivered from a place of love, compassion, and respect, can be a powerful force for healing and growth. However, when wielded as a tool for aggression or self-righteousness, it becomes a destructive force. Consider, too, the emotionally unavailable integrator, an individual who, after recognizing their fear of intimacy, vulnerability, or commitment, withdraws from close relationships, citing a need for personal space or self-discovery, but failing to communicate their needs effectively or respectfully. This violates emotional boundaries because the integrator is creating distance and withholding affection without giving their partner a chance to understand, adapt, or negotiate the changing dynamics of the relationship. They are hurting their partner, pushing them away, and creating a sense of abandonment or rejection, and perhaps repeating a primal wound from childhood. And finally, there is the self-righteous integrator, a person who, after confronting their own biases, prejudices, or shortcomings, becomes judgmental, condescending, and even preachy towards others who have not yet woken up or embraced the same level of self-awareness. They may create a sense of intellectual or spiritual superiority, alienating those around them and undermining genuine connection. This violates mental boundaries, as the integrator is imposing their own beliefs, values, and perspectives on others without genuine dialogue, understanding, or respect for differing viewpoints. They are becoming insufferable, convinced of their own righteousness, and blind to their own potential for error. In all of these cases, the individual is prioritizing their own needs, feelings, and agenda above those of others, leading to damaged relationships, ethical breaches, and a fundamental failure to understand the true meaning of shadow integration. Boundary building, a shield and a bridge to avoid these pitfalls and foster a more ethical and sustainable path of shadow integration. It is essential to develop practical strategies for setting and maintaining healthy boundaries. First, communicate clearly and assertively. Express your needs, limits, and boundaries directly, respectfully, and without ambiguity, using I statements to avoid blaming, accusing, or putting others on the defensive. For example, instead of saying, "You always interrupt me," try saying, "I need some time to myself this evening to process my feelings, so I won't be able to attend the social event." Second, learn to say no. Resist the urge to overcommit, overextend yourself, or please others at your own expense. Saying no is not selfish or unkind, but rather a form of self-care, boundary maintenance, and a recognition of your own limitations. For example, instead of reluctantly agreeing to take on yet another task, try saying, "Thank you for the invitation, but I'm not able to take on any new commitments right now." Third, respect other people's boundaries. Be mindful of other people's limits, needs, and boundaries, and avoid pressuring them to do things they're not comfortable with, share information they don't want to disclose, or engage in activities they find objectionable. For example, instead of pushing someone to talk about a sensitive topic, try saying, "I understand that you don't want to talk about this right now, and I respect that. I'm here for you when you're ready." Fourth, enforce consequences. Be prepared to enforce your boundaries if they are violated, whether it means ending a conversation, limiting contact, or seeking professional help. For example, instead of tolerating disrespectful behavior, try saying, "If you continue to raise your voice at me, I will have to end this conversation." And finally, practice self-compassion. Recognize that setting boundaries can be difficult, uncomfortable, and even anxiety-provoking, and that you may make mistakes along the way. Treat yourself with kindness, understanding, and forgiveness as you learn, grow, and refine your approach. It's okay to make mistakes. Shadow integration is a journey, not a destination. By setting healthy boundaries, we can protect ourselves from harm, foster healthier relationships, and create a more ethical and sustainable path of shadow integration, one that benefits not only ourselves, but also those around us. From guarded to guided, ethical shadow integration. In summary, ethical shadow work necessitates a heightened awareness of relational dynamics and the potential impact of our actions on others. Boundaries are not merely lines in the sand, but rather essential tools for navigating this complex terrain, allowing us to explore our inner landscape with both courage and compassion. The core value of mindful and compassionate integration lies in fostering personal responsibility, not reckless self-discovery. It is about becoming more whole, more aware, and more connected, not about justifying harmful behavior or shirking our obligations to others. With these boundary tools in hand, how does this play out on the societal level? Can a nation, too, overstep its bounds in the name of integration? And what historical examples might illuminate this dangerous path? In the next section, we will explore a specific historical event to highlight the dangers of collective shadow integration gone wrong, revealing how the repressed darkness of a nation can manifest in devastating ways. Can a nation, like an individual, succumb to the dark allure of its shadow, projecting its disowned qualities onto others with devastating consequences? What happens when a society collectively represses its vulnerabilities, its fears, its unacceptable impulses, and then projects them onto a scapegoat, amplifying them to monstrous proportions? Let us consider the tragic case of Nazi Germany not merely as a recounting of historical events, but as a psychological case study on a grand scale, a chilling illustration of the potential dangers of collective shadow projection. Imagine a crucible, a vessel capable of withstanding intense heat, used for melting down and purifying metals. Now envision historical circumstances acting as such a crucible, where collective anxieties and repressed desires boil over, leading to the projection of the shadow onto a carefully chosen scapegoat. The properties of a crucible are key. It must be strong enough to contain immense pressure, resistant to corrosion, and capable of focusing heat on its contents. These properties mirror the socio-political conditions that allow collective shadow projection to take hold of society under immense stress, resistant to self-reflection, and intensely focused on externalizing its problems. But let us not be mistaken. This phenomenon of collective shadow projection is not limited to the past. It remains an ever-present danger, a lurking potential within any society grappling with fear, uncertainty, and a loss of meaning. To understand how Germany in the interwar period became fertile ground for such a catastrophic projection, we must delve into its historical context. Consider the economic devastation wrought by World War I, leaving Germany crippled by debt, its industrial heartland ravaged, and its people struggling to survive. This was further compounded by the hyperinflation of the early 1920s, which wiped out savings, devalued currency, and plunged millions into poverty and despair. Is it any wonder that resentment and desperation festered, creating a breeding ground for extremist ideologies? Adding to this economic turmoil was the political instability of the Weimar Republic, a fragile democracy burdened by a fragmented party system, frequent changes in government, and a seemingly insurmountable inability to address the country's pressing problems effectively. Imagine a ship without a rudder, tossed about by turbulent waves. this was the Weimar Republic, unable to provide a stable course or inspire confidence in its citizens. Was it possible for a nation to heal when its leadership was in constant disarray? Then, consider the national humiliation caused by the Treaty of Versailles, that punitive document which imposed harsh reparations on Germany, stripped it of territory, and most gallingly, laid the sole blame for the war at its feet. This treaty was felt by many Germans as a deep injustice, a wound to their national pride, and a constant reminder of their defeat and vulnerability. Was it any surprise that this humiliation fueled a longing for revenge and a restoration of national greatness? And finally, there was the widespread sense of cultural malaise and disillusionment that permeated German society in the 1920s. Many Germans felt alienated from the rapid modernization of society, longing for a return to traditional values, a simpler way of life, and a renewed sense of national identity. The avant-garde art and social movements of the era were seen by some as a sign of moral decay, a further erosion of traditional values. With these factors combined, a climate of fear, anxiety, and resentment arose, making the German population uniquely vulnerable to scapegoating and the seductive promises of extremist ideologies. It was in this crucible of societal stress that the Nazi Party emerged, skillfully manipulating these anxieties and projecting the collective shadow of the German people onto the Jewish population. Nazi propaganda portrayed Jews as a threat to German racial purity, economic prosperity, and national security, using pamphlets, posters, and films to spread their hateful message. Consider, for example, Der Stürmer, a Nazi newspaper that published inflammatory articles and caricatures, demonizing Jews and portraying them as enemies of the German people. Was this not a deliberate attempt to create a climate of fear and suspicion, to turn ordinary citizens into willing participants in a campaign of hatred? The Nazis used stereotypes and conspiracy theories to dehumanize Jews, portraying them as greedy, manipulative, disloyal, and cosmopolitan. Jews were accused of controlling the banks, manipulating the media, and undermining traditional German values. Were not these accusations designed to tap into deep-seated anxieties about economic instability, cultural change, and the loss of national identity? Through calculated propaganda, they transformed a diverse population into a singular, easily targeted other. Scapegoating became a central strategy, deflecting blame for Germany's problems onto the Jewish population, accusing them of being responsible for the country's economic woes, political instability, and cultural decline. Instead of confronting their own shortcomings and failures, Germans were encouraged to project their fears and frustrations onto an external enemy. What easier way to avoid confronting the difficult truths about one's own society than to blame all its ills on a readily identifiable group? Charismatic leaders like Hitler played a crucial role in channeling and amplifying these projections, offering a clear target for collective anger and resentment. He became a vessel for the nation's disowned qualities, a figure onto whom Germans could project their own repressed desires for power, dominance, and revenge. Hitler's own shadow aspects, his rage, his paranoia, his ruthlessness, resonated with the collective German shadow, creating a dangerous feedback loop. Was it not the power of his rhetoric, his ability to tap into the unconscious fears and desires of the German people, that allowed him to rise to power? Ultimately, the Nazis facilitated the psychological process of disowning personal sins by attributing them to an external enemy. By projecting their own negative qualities onto the Jewish population, Germans could feel a sense of moral superiority, cleansing themselves of guilt and responsibility. In this way, the shadow became a powerful tool for social control, allowing the Nazi regime to consolidate its power and silence dissent. Was it not a terrible irony that the very act of seeking to purify the nation led to its ultimate destruction? The consequences of this collective shadow projection were devastating, both for the Jewish population and for German society as a whole. The escalating persecution of Jews, from discriminatory laws and economic boycotts to violence, pogroms, and ultimately the Holocaust, stands as a stark reminder of the horrors that can result when a society embraces hatred and dehumanization. How did a nation of poets and philosophers descend into such barbarity? The dehumanization of Jews paved the way for mass murder, making it easier for ordinary Germans to participate in or condone the atrocities. The victims were no longer seen as human beings, but as vermin, as a disease to be eradicated. The erosion of moral values and the suppression of dissent in German society allowed the Nazi regime to consolidate its power and enforce conformity. Those who spoke out against the regime were silenced, imprisoned, or killed, creating a climate of fear and intimidation. And so, a nation was consumed by darkness, its soul poisoned by hatred, and its hands stained with blood. In the end, this national descent into darkness served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked collective shadow projection. It is a reminder that it is impossible to destroy others without destroying a part of oneself. The war, the devastation, the lasting trauma, these were the self-inflicted wounds of a nation that had lost its way, a nation that had succumbed to the dark allure of its own shadow. Can a nation ever truly recover from such a profound moral collapse? Collective shadow projection is not a relic of the past, but a recurring phenomenon that can manifest in different forms throughout history and in contemporary society. The psychological mechanisms that made Germany vulnerable to shadow projection, economic hardship, political instability, cultural anxieties, and the presence of charismatic leaders who exploit these vulnerabilities remain ever-present dangers. How does this historical tragedy inform our understanding of contemporary social and political conflicts? Can we recognize similar patterns of shadow projection in today's world? And if so, what can we do to resist them? We've only scratched the surface of the historical event and its rippling impacts. In the next section, we will explore specific examples of how shadow projection manifests in contemporary society, offering tools for critical thinking and responsible action. If the manipulation of collective anxieties proved so devastating in the past, are we immune from such influences today? Are we witnessing a modern echo of collective shadow projection, not through a single leader as much as through fragmented online and media narratives? Contemporary political discourse often mirrors the tactics of past propaganda, exploiting similar anxieties to fuel division and animosity, albeit through different mediums. Just as economic insecurity, cultural change, and fear of the other were exploited in Nazi Germany, these same anxieties are weaponized in today's political landscape. While propaganda films have been replaced by social media memes and rallies by online forums, the underlying psychological dynamics of scapegoating and dehumanization remain chillingly consistent. But what does this through line throughout history signify for our current social climate? Is this a sign that the shadow is an unavoidable aspect of society? Political polarization creates an environment ripe for shadow projection, with each side demonizing the other and attributing all societal problems to their opponents. This is not to say that all criticisms are invalid, but it is important to recognize the potential for shadow projection to distort our perceptions and fuel animosity. It is when we simplify entire groups of people to being evil or malicious that the shadow takes hold. Consider, for example, how liberals often project their shadow onto conservatives. Conservatives are frequently portrayed as ignorant, hateful, and out of touch with reality, their viewpoints dismissed as unscientific or anti-intellectual. Accusations of racism, sexism, and homophobia, while sometimes based on genuine concerns, can also become a form of shadow projection, attributing all societal ills to the supposed bigotry of conservatives. Is this not a way of avoiding a confrontation with one's own prejudices and biases, projecting the shadow onto others? On the other hand, conservatives often project their shadow onto liberals, portraying them as godless, unpatriotic, and intent on destroying traditional values. Accusations of socialism, communism, and moral decay, while sometimes based on genuine concerns, can also become a form of shadow projection, attributing all societal ills to the supposed moral depravity of liberals. Is this not a way of avoiding a confrontation with one's own failings, seeing one's shadow in the enemy? Both sides are guilty of reducing complex issues to simplistic caricatures, making it easier to demonize their opponents and avoid confronting their own shadow aspects. This, of course, does not absolve one of accountability for their shortcomings. Social media plays a critical role in amplifying this polarization and shadow projection, creating echo chambers and filter bubbles that reinforce existing biases. Algorithms curate content to show people what they already agree with, limiting exposure to diverse perspectives and reinforcing echo chambers. The spread of misinformation and disinformation on social media is often designed to manipulate emotions and incite outrage, further contributing to existing animosity. What happens when individuals are only exposed to one side of an argument? Is the outcome of their argument an accurate perspective or something else? Furthermore, the phenomenon of online pile-ons and cancel culture, where individuals are publicly shamed and ostracized for expressing unpopular opinions, silences dissent and stifles open dialogue. This creates a climate of fear, where people are afraid to express their true views for fear of being attacked or ostracized. As we previously discussed, social media can amplify both positive and negative aspects of human nature, which means that, left unchecked, shadow projection can take hold and cause chaos. Moreover, the modern attention economy is not conducive to shadow work. Deep introspection requires time, patience, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about oneself. Yet, social media platforms are designed to be addictive, constantly bombarding users with stimuli and encouraging them to seek external validation rather than engage in introspection. The algorithm wants to keep one scrolling. Shadow work is the antithesis of infinite scrolling. How can one expect to self-reflect when their attention is a commodity, constantly being bought and sold? Ultimately, we must recognize that resisting shadow projection starts with individual responsibility. What are your own trigger points when it comes to political issues? What qualities do you most dislike in your political opponents? Could those qualities be present in yourself? Can you try to understand the perspectives of those who disagree with you, even if you find their views abhorrent? Can you find common ground and build bridges across the political divide? These questions are often difficult to face head-on, but that is where the real value of shadow work is revealed. To break the cycle of shadow projection, we can actively seek out diverse perspectives and challenge our own assumptions. We can engage in respectful dialogue with people who hold different views, focusing on issues rather than personalities. We can practice self-compassion and recognize that everyone is flawed. Individual action is essential for creating a more just and compassionate world. But is this understanding enough to impact elections and change society? Is it enough to vote every few years to have true self-impact? We must recognize the contemporary manifestations of shadow projection and reinforce the relevance of historical lessons. We need critical thinking, empathy, and responsible online engagement to resist manipulation and collective division. Individual responsibility can disrupt destructive patterns of societal projection. But is it enough to simply recognize and resist shadow projection? Or can we actively transform these destructive energies into a force for positive change? What specific practices can we cultivate to foster greater understanding, empathy, and healing within our polarized societies? In the upcoming section, we will explore specific methods of conflict resolution and collective healing, offering practices that could help us bridge these divides. If simply recognizing shadow projection in political discourse were enough, our world would be a far more harmonious place. Merely pointing out the problem, however, is akin to a doctor diagnosing a patient's illness without prescribing any treatment. Which is better, to name the disease or to have the right medicine? How, then, can we move beyond identifying shadow projection to actively transforming these destructive energies into a force for positive change? Enter the concept of compassionate witnessing, a conscious practice of observing and acknowledging suffering, both in ourselves and in others, without judgment or intervention. It is the active treatment. Compassionate witnessing is not about condoning harmful behavior, but about understanding its root causes and responding with empathy and a desire for healing. It is a means of engaging with the shadow, rather than being consumed by it. How can one separate the intent of compassion from the action or words that cause pain? Compassionate witnessing offers a powerful path to de-escalate conflict, foster connection, and promote individual and collective healing. But what does it truly entail? Compassionate witnessing requires a multifaceted approach, encompassing specific qualities and practices that, when cultivated, can profoundly alter our interactions with the world. One of the foundational elements is empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of others, even when you vehemently disagree with them. Empathy necessitates actively listening to and validating other people's experiences, rather than dismissing or judging them. It's about putting yourself in their shoes, attempting to see the world from their perspective. Can you truly understand someone's pain without feeling it yourself? Empathy can be used constructively by creating a space for dialogue and understanding. This capacity leads to active listening, paying close attention to what others are saying, both verbally and non-verbally, and responding in a way that demonstrates comprehension of their perspective. Specific techniques for active listening include summarizing their points, asking clarifying questions, and reflecting on their emotions. But how does one ensure that active listening does not devolve into tacit agreement with the other party, especially when their views are harmful or unethical? To practice compassionate witnessing, one must also cultivate a non-judgmental presence, approaching others with an open mind and a willingness to see them as complex human beings, rather than reducing them to simplistic labels or stereotypes. A non-judgmental presence requires suspending your own assumptions and biases and creating a safe space for others to express themselves. It is about recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of every individual, regardless of their beliefs or actions. What is required to create that safe space, especially when facing someone who has caused harm? Perhaps most importantly, self-compassion is essential for compassionate witnessing. Treating yourself with kindness and understanding, recognizing that you are also flawed and imperfect. Self-compassion allows you to approach others with greater empathy and acceptance, recognizing that everyone is struggling in their own way. It is the foundation upon which all other forms of compassion are built. How can you offer compassion to others if you cannot offer it to yourself? This also includes bearing witness, deliberately witnessing traumatic experiences or injustices in the world, acknowledging that these actions happened and have real consequences. This can take many forms, from attending protests and vigils to reading news articles and watching documentaries. How can we bear witness to suffering without becoming overwhelmed or desensitized? These qualities, when put into practice, can transform even the most challenging real-world scenarios. Consider, for example, a heated political debate. Instead of interrupting or attacking your opponent, practice active listening by summarizing their arguments and asking clarifying questions. Try to understand their perspective, even if you disagree with their conclusions. Acknowledge any valid points they make, even if you disagree with their overall stance. This does not mean you are endorsing their views, but rather that you are engaging with them in a respectful and thoughtful manner. What are some valid points that could be agreed upon, even between people with vastly different political ideologies? Or consider a conflict on social media. Instead of engaging in a flame war, take a step back, try to understand the other person's motivations, and respond with curiosity rather than anger. Ask clarifying questions, avoid personal attacks, and focus on finding common ground. Can you find common ground, even if you disagree with someone's fundamental values? The objective is not to win the argument, but to foster understanding and connection. Even within the context of a family disagreement, the principles of compassionate witnessing can be applied. Instead of getting defensive or dismissive, create a safe space for your family members to express their feelings and beliefs, even if they are different from your own. Validate their experiences, listen without judgment, and focus on building understanding rather than winning the argument. What is the true purpose of having a difficult conversation with a family member, if not to win? Another way to practice compassionate witnessing is by actively watching and understanding the events happening at a protest, rather than taking the story at face value or based on assumptions. This involves interviewing people in person and hearing about their individual experiences. What other methods can be employed to effectively bear witness to events unfolding in the world? These are not passive actions. Rather, compassionate witnessing is an active and intentional choice to engage with others in a way that fosters healing, understanding, and connection. It is a commitment to seeing the humanity in everyone, even those with whom we deeply disagree. It is about recognizing that everyone is struggling and that we are all in this together. But what happens when we extend compassionate witnessing to the wider world? Compassionate witnessing is not a quick fix, but a long-term practice that requires ongoing self-reflection, empathy, and a willingness to challenge our own biases. It is a journey of self-discovery and personal growth. However, by cultivating compassionate witnessing in our own lives, we can create a ripple effect, inspiring others to do the same and fostering a more just and compassionate world. It begins with each individual, but it extends outward, influencing our relationships, our communities, and our societies. What would it look like to integrate our collective shadow tendencies into the world, to create a society that embraces compassion and understanding? But can these individual practices be scaled up to address the deep-seated divisions and traumas that plague our societies? What collective rituals and practices can we cultivate to foster greater understanding, empathy, and healing on a larger scale? How can we extend these practices beyond ourselves and impact the world around us, bridging the divides that separate us? We often speak of the shadow as a monstrous entity lurking in the depths of the unconscious, manifesting in extreme situations or historical events. But what if the shadow were not some distant leviathan, but rather a subtle current coursing through our daily lives, influencing our interactions and shaping our perceptions in ways we barely notice? Consider the possibility that the shadow is like background radiation, constantly present, but often unnoticed, unless we have the right tools to detect it. This section aims to provide you with those tools, shifting our focus from grand pronouncements to the practical application of spotting shadow behaviors in ourselves and others. How does our personal shadow influence our day-to-day interactions, and are we even aware of its subtle machinations? Let us now consider specific, often overlooked, ways the shadow manifests in our day-to-day lives. These are not dramatic eruptions of evil, but rather subtle clues, micro-expressions of the shadow that can reveal its presence. One of the most common is passive aggressiveness, an unconscious expression of repressed anger and a fear of direct confrontation. This can manifest as procrastination, sarcasm disguised as humor, forgetting important tasks, or subtle undermining of others' efforts. Consider a hypothetical office interaction. A colleague is consistently late to meetings, claiming unforeseen circumstances, while subtly rolling their eyes when others speak. Are these isolated incidents, or are they indicative of deeper, shadow-driven dynamics? The unconscious motivations behind passive-aggressive behavior are manifold, ranging from a fear of expressing anger directly to a need to maintain control in subtle ways. But here is what they don't want you to know. Passive-aggressive behavior erodes trust and fosters resentment, creating a toxic environment where true collaboration is impossible. How is it that those with repressed anger never blow up, but but always find a way to get their point across in damaging ways. Another pervasive manifestation of the shadow is gossip and backbiting. While often dismissed as harmless social chatter, gossip serves a deeper psychological purpose. It can be a means of boosting self-esteem by putting others down, projecting our own insecurities onto them, or seeking social connection through shared judgment. However, the shocking truth is that gossip rarely reveals anything about the subject, and almost always reveals everything about the person gossiping. Gossip reflects disowned shadow qualities such as envy, judgment, and schadenfreude, the pleasure derived from the misfortune of others. Ask yourself, what are you really talking about when you talk about others? The rise and fall of influencers is a perfect example of this. Those who see the success of the influencer, but see their character as flawed, are given an opportunity to tear them down because it makes them feel better about themselves. Why do we so often tear down that which we envy? Furthermore, judgmental thoughts are a potent indicator of the shadow at work. Excessive criticism of others often reflects our own repressed insecurities and shadow aspects. Snap judgments and knee-jerk reactions can reveal hidden biases and prejudices that we are unwilling to acknowledge in ourselves. Why do we judge the book by its cover? This is because we want to put it down. These subconscious reactions can be revealing of a disowned trait. Someone that is quick to point out the negative qualities of another likely fears those qualities within themselves. But here is what most people miss. Those who are quick to judge are often the most insecure. Those who feel no threat from the behavior of others are too self-assured to care about it. Is excessive judgment a mask for deeper self-doubt? Even seemingly innocuous behaviors like resistance to help can stem from shadow-related issues. Refusing assistance, even when needed, can be rooted in pride, fear of vulnerability, or a need to maintain control. Accepting help requires acknowledging our limitations and surrendering a degree of independence, both of which can be threatening to the ego. But what they don't want you to know is that we must depend on one another. This allows us to form symbiotic relationships and makes us stronger as a whole. Those who do not depend on others isolate themselves. Is our reluctance to ask for help a sign of strength or a reflection of deeper insecurities? What happens when those who refuse help are thrust into a situation in which they need it? Finally, unexplained aversions can point to repressed traits we find unacceptable in ourselves. Intense dislike of certain people can be a sign that they embody qualities that we have disowned and projected onto them. This is a classic example of shadow projection, where we see our own hidden aspects reflected in others. Are we truly disliking them, or are we disliking a hidden part of ourselves? It is easy to get along with those with whom we agree, but much harder to accept and like those who have opposing viewpoints. But perhaps that is because we know that the other viewpoint is valid and our own is not. To better understand how these subtle shadow manifestations play out, let us consider some specific, relatable scenarios. Imagine the office saboteur. A coworker consistently forgets to include a colleague on important emails, undermining their performance and creating tension within the team. What shadow dynamics are at play here? Envy, competition, and a need for control are likely driving factors. The saboteur may unconsciously resent the colleague's success and seek to diminish their influence within the team. The office environment itself can be a breeding ground for shadow behavior, as it often fosters competition, insecurity, and a constant need for validation. Why is it that offices are often a melting pot of negativity? It's because in the enclosed environment there is increased pressure to succeed, and thus it leads to negative behaviors towards one another. Consider also the critical parent. A parent constantly criticizes their child's appearance or performance, projecting their own insecurities and unmet expectations onto the child. What shadow dynamics are involved in this dynamic? Perfectionism, fear of failure, and a need to control are common culprits. The parent may unconsciously be trying to mold the child into an idealized version of themselves, one that compensates for their own perceived shortcomings. What is not often discussed is that criticism can be just as damaging as physical abuse. However, you must be careful in how you raise your children, because you are also projecting yourself onto them. Or imagine the social media envy trap. An individual spends hours scrolling through social media, feeling increasingly inadequate and resentful of others' seemingly perfect lives. What shadow dynamics are at play here? Envy, comparison, and a longing for validation are fueling this cycle of negativity. The individual is projecting their own desires and aspirations onto the curated images they see online, leading to feelings of inadequacy and resentment. Social media preys on this desire to cause you to compare yourself and feel envy. Why is it that the media wants us to compare ourselves to each other? It is because when we envy, we buy things in order to measure up. That is how they make money. Finally, consider the self-sacrificing martyr. An individual constantly puts the needs of others before their own, neglecting their own well-being and building resentment over time. What shadow dynamics are involved? Fear of selfishness, a need for approval, and repressed anger are often at the root of this pattern. The individual may unconsciously believe that they are only worthy of love and attention if they constantly sacrifice themselves for others, leading to a cycle of resentment and exhaustion. These are the people who say, "I'm not appreciated." What most people do not realize is that it is not anyone's job to appreciate them. When they live a life of sacrifice and expect to be appreciated, they are the ones with the problem. It is crucial to recognize these patterns in ourselves and others, not to judge or condemn, but to understand the underlying psychological dynamics and promote healthier behavior. However, the true forbidden knowledge is to understand why we have these feelings, and not to simply know that we are having them. We must truly explore our past to get to the root cause of our pain. In essence, noticing the subtle manifestations of the shadow can lead to increased self-awareness, empathy, and compassion, both for ourselves and for others. Shadow integration is not about eliminating these behaviors entirely, but about becoming more conscious of them and choosing how to respond in a more healthy way. This increased self-awareness will give you more power to control your actions and behavior. Now that we can spot these shadow behaviors, how can we actively manage them in the moment, transforming potential conflict into connection and growth? What specific techniques can help us respond to shadow triggers with greater awareness, empathy, and skill? Spotting shadow behaviors in ourselves and others is a valuable skill, a crucial first step in the long journey toward integration. But how do we actively manage these behaviors in real time, before they cause harm, before they spiral out of control? How do we prevent the shadow from dictating our actions and shaping our reality? It is important to have practical tools to use in these situations, tools that can be readily deployed when we feel ourselves slipping into shadow behaviors. But what if the most potent tool is simply silence? Consider this. The most damaging thing you can do is react without thinking. Let us introduce the art of the pause, a conscious practice of creating a moment of space between stimulus and response, especially when triggered by shadow-related emotions. Explain that this is easier said than done. It is tempting to react immediately, to lash out, to defend ourselves. But the true power lies in resisting this urge, in creating a buffer zone between trigger and reaction. The art of the pause is not about suppressing emotions, but about gaining control over our reactions and choosing a more thoughtful and constructive response. It is about reclaiming our agency in the face of the shadow's influence. What the shadow doesn't want you to know is that it depends on your immediate reaction. It needs your unconsciousness and your lack of control. This pause can take many forms. It can be a literal breath, a deep, cleansing inhale that allows us to regain our composure. It can be a calculated retreat from a situation, a temporary removal of ourselves from the source of the trigger. It can be a silent moment of reflection, a quick assessment of our emotions and motivations. But perhaps the most effective pause is a combination of all three: a breath, a retreat, and a reflection, all interwoven to create a moment of clarity and conscious choice. This is what allows you to choose your destiny and keeps the shadow from choosing it for you. To truly master the art of the pause, we must first understand our triggers, those specific situations, people, or topics that consistently evoke strong emotional reactions. How do we transform potentially destructive situations into opportunities for self-awareness and growth? How do we learn to recognize the telltale signs of an impending shadow eruption? We must become aware of our emotional barometer, recognizing the physical and emotional sensations that signal a shadow trigger. The body often provides the first clues, telegraphing the shadow's approach long before it reaches our conscious awareness. Increased heart rate, clenched fists, sweaty palms, shallow breathing, these are all physical manifestations of the shadow's stirring. Feelings of anger, anxiety, defensiveness, shame, or resentment can also serve as early warning signs. List concrete symptoms to look out for. What physical and emotional changes do you experience when triggered? Do you feel your face flush? Do you find yourself clenching your jaw? Do you notice a sudden urge to criticize or attack? The shadow whispers in the body long before it shouts in the mind. And if you do not listen, it will take control. Consider the concept of trigger mapping, identifying specific situations, people, or topics that consistently evoke strong emotional reactions. What are your personal shadow hotspots? What specific situations tend to push your buttons? What topics ignite your anger or defensiveness? What people trigger your insecurities or anxieties? Map out your triggers by journaling and reflection. Ask yourself, what specific situations make me feel most vulnerable or threatened? What types of people tend to irritate or annoy me? What topics am I most likely to avoid or become defensive about? Keep a journal to identify these triggers. For example, if someone's immediate reaction to a criticism is defensiveness, they must learn to recognize that feeling, pause, and ask if there is any merit to the criticism. This is not about repressing that feeling, but about understanding its origins and choosing a more constructive response. Perhaps the criticism is valid, and the defensiveness is a sign of pride or insecurity. Perhaps the criticism is unfounded, and the defensiveness is a sign of a need for self-protection. In either case, recognizing the trigger is the first step towards managing the reaction and preventing shadow behaviors from escalating. This self-reflection is paramount to your safety. If you are not self-reflective, you are at the mercy of your shadow. Recognizing your triggers is the first step towards managing your reactions and preventing shadow behaviors from escalating. But recognizing the trigger is not enough. We must also have practical tools for managing these triggers in real time, techniques that can help us navigate difficult situations with greater awareness, empathy, and skill. What specific strategies can we use to disarm the shadow in the heat of the moment? One such strategy is the stop technique, a simple but powerful tool for creating space between stimulus and response. Stop. Immediately halt the interaction or thought process. Freeze. Cease all activity. This is the first line of defense against the shadow's influence. Take a breath. Focus on your breath to calm your nervous system. Deep, slow breaths can help to regulate your heart rate, reduce anxiety, and bring you back to the present moment. Inhale peace and exhale the shadow. Observe. Notice your thoughts, feelings, and physical sensations without judgment. Become a detached observer of your own internal experience. What thoughts are racing through your mind? What emotions are bubbling to the surface? What physical sensations are you experiencing? Proceed. Choose a more conscious and constructive response. Now that you have created space and gained clarity, you can choose how to respond in a way that aligns with your values and goals. Will you choose anger or peace? Another powerful technique is reframing, challenging negative thoughts and reframing the situation in a more positive or neutral light. The shadow often distorts our perception of reality, leading us to interpret events in the worst possible light. Reframing allows us to challenge these negative interpretations and see the situation from a different perspective. For example, instead of thinking, "This person is attacking me," think, "This person is expressing their opinion, which may be different from mine." This puts you back in control. The shadow wants you to think you are powerless, but you are not. The empathy exercise is yet another tool for managing shadow triggers, actively trying to understand the other person's perspective and motivations. The shadow often blinds us to the humanity of others, leading us to see them as enemies or obstacles. Empathy allows us to break through this barrier and recognize the shared human experience. Ask yourself, what might be going on for this person that is causing them to act this way? Perhaps they are struggling with their own shadow aspects, or perhaps they are simply having a bad day. By extending empathy, we can diffuse the situation and create the possibility for connection and understanding. Boundary setting is also crucial for managing shadow triggers, assertively communicating your needs and limits and disengaging from the interaction if necessary. The shadow often thrives in situations where our boundaries are weak or non-existent. By setting clear boundaries, we can protect ourselves from being manipulated, exploited, or abused. For example, "I need to take a break from this conversation as I'm feeling overwhelmed. Let's revisit this later." This keeps you in control. What the shadow doesn't want you to know is that it needs you to be weak. That is how it gets its power. And while it may be impossible to do a full active imagination, calling up archetypes and engaging with them for a brief moment may help ease the shadow's grip. The archetypes reside in the deepest parts of your consciousness and will help you to recognize these dangerous traits. Even just a moment of reflection will help. This is an active imagination exercise. To illustrate how these techniques can be applied in specific, challenging situations, let us consider some concrete examples. What does shadow management look like in the real world? Imagine the overbearing boss. A viewer is confronted by an overbearing boss who is constantly critical and demanding. The viewer recognizes their trigger, feeling devalued and resentful. They use the stop technique to pause, take a breath, observe their emotions, and then choose to respond assertively but respectfully, setting a boundary. "I appreciate your feedback, but I'm feeling overwhelmed by the constant criticism. Can we schedule a time to discuss my performance in more detail?" The success in this situation is measured by the boss's reaction. If the boss is more understanding, the technique was a success. Or imagine the passive-aggressive partner. A viewer is confronted by a partner who is constantly making sarcastic remarks and undermining their efforts. The viewer recognizes their trigger, feeling angry and disrespected. They use reframing to challenge their negative thoughts. "My partner is trying to control me," and consider the possibility that their partner is feeling insecure or unheard. They then engage in empathetic communication. "I'm feeling hurt by your sarcastic comments. Can we talk about what's going on for you?" The success here is measured by a change in behavior of the partner. Or what about the online troll? A viewer is confronted by an online troll who is posting offensive and inflammatory comments. The viewer recognizes their trigger, feeling outraged and wanting to retaliate. They use boundary setting to disengage from the interaction, blocking the troll and reporting their behavior to the platform administrator. They then practice self-compassion, reminding themselves that the troll's behavior is not a reflection of their own worth. The success here is measured by the lack of need to retaliate. It is an understanding that what the troll does has nothing to do with you. These situations emphasize the importance of self-awareness, empathy, and conscious action. The shadow wants you to lash out, to react without thinking, to succumb to your darkest impulses. But by mastering the art of the pause and employing these practical techniques, we can reclaim our agency and choose a more constructive path. What the shadow doesn't want you to know is that it is simply trying to protect you. Managing the shadow is an ongoing process, requiring patience, persistence, and a willingness to learn from our mistakes. There will be times when we stumble, when we succumb to our shadow impulses, when we say or do things we regret. But these setbacks are not failures. They are opportunities for growth and learning. It is important to not give up. By learning to manage our shadow triggers, we can improve our relationships, enhance our well-being, and create a more compassionate and just world. What the shadow doesn't want you to know is that you are capable of great things, and if you work with your shadow, it will make you stronger than you ever imagined. But what about the deep-seated, chronic shadow patterns that resist these in-the-moment interventions? What advanced techniques can we use to unearth and transform these deeply ingrained aspects of ourselves? And how can we integrate them into our conscious lives in a healthy and sustainable way? In the next section, we will delve into advanced practices such as shadow journaling, dream tending, and therapeutic integration, offering tools for profound and lasting transformation. In closing, as we draw our exploration of the shadow to a close, it is time to consolidate our understanding of this complex and often misunderstood aspect of the human psyche. Throughout this journey, we have traversed the depths of the unconscious, confronted the archetypal figures that embody the shadow, and examined the consequences of its repression, both on an individual and collective level. We have seen how the shadow, far from being merely a repository of negativity, contains within it untapped potential, a source of creativity, and a pathway to wholeness. What the shadow wants most is simply to be understood. To summarize our exploration, we have defined the shadow as the disowned self, that collection of traits, emotions, and impulses that we deem unacceptable and attempt to suppress. We have examined its archetypal manifestations, from the mischievous trickster to the tyrannical oppressor, each representing a different facet of the shadow's multifaceted nature. We have considered the dire consequences of ignoring the shadow, the projections that distort our perceptions and poison our relationships, the compulsive behaviors that undermine our well-being, and the collective catastrophes that erupt when societies fail to confront their own darkness. And most importantly, we have emphasized the crucial importance of integration, of acknowledging and embracing our shadow aspects, not as something to be feared or eradicated, but as an integral part of our being. It is through self-awareness, integration, duality, projection, and compassionate witnessing that we can truly come to terms with our whole self. Returning to the initial paradox of light and darkness, we can now see that our exploration has revealed that one cannot exist without the other. The shadow is not merely the absence of light, but its necessary counterpart, the very ground from which it emerges. Embracing the darkness is not an endorsement of evil, but a prerequisite for truly knowing the light. This is not about condoning or excusing harmful behaviors, but about understanding the underlying motivations and unmet needs that drive them. It is about recognizing that even the most destructive impulses originate from a place of pain or fear. And by integrating these darker aspects of ourselves, we can transform them into sources of strength, compassion, and wisdom. Only by confronting our own darkness can we hope to create a more compassionate and just world. This journey, though deeply personal, reflects the universal human struggle to reconcile the inner and outer worlds, the conscious and unconscious. It is a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to overcome adversity, to heal wounds, and to grow into our fullest potential. The seeds of transformation lie dormant within our shadows, waiting for the courage to embrace them so that they may blossom into a whole. What the shadow doesn't want you to know is that it contains the secrets to your destiny. The journey doesn't end here. It extends into the daily choices that will determine your own destiny. By embracing our shadows, we step closer to a future where inner peace translates into global harmony. We encourage you to continue exploring your own shadows, perhaps through journaling, dream analysis, therapy, or further reading on Jungian psychology. The path of individuation is a lifelong journey, and the shadow will continue to reveal new facets of itself as we grow and evolve. And in exploring yourself, you begin to explore the world. That concludes our exploration of the shadow. Thank you for watching.